Just want to double check. Elizabeth, can you just verify that you can see us on the web? I can see us on the web. It says we're recording. Okay, good. Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and click record in the WebEx. So we are good to go and we are live streaming. Yahoo!
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. And a special thank you.
You're welcome. And here, there we go.
Special thank you to the staff for all of the work in getting this set up. Certainly appreciate everyone on the commission taking the time to be with us during these trying times. I think this is probably covered in housekeeping, but if you can, mute your microphones when you're not talking, and I think that'll help the sound quality for everyone else. And then if you have anything you want to say, just unmute at any time and go ahead. In order to get votes recorded, we're going to have to go through a somewhat cumbersome process of taking a roll call. Otherwise, there's no good way to record votes. Also, I'm going to ask, actually, I'll take a roll call just for purposes of attendance and a quorum, just so that we know that we have a quorum. So with that, Dr. Buffalino, are you with us?
Here.
Ms. DeCastro?
Here.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes, sir.
Judge Mazzarelli?
Yes, I'm
Dr. O'Neill?
I'm here.
Dr. Walsh?
Here, thanks.
Thank you. Superintendent Corlett, I don't believe he could be with us today. Is that true? All right, no answer, so I think that is true. Dr. Dooley?
Present.
Mr. Loftus?
Present.
Mr. McNamara?
Here.
Mr. Oster?
Here.
And Willie, I believe, is not able to be with us. Is that right? I feel very bad for her, but I think this is the day she was being airlifted off of her island. So very, very tough stuff she had to deal with. We do have a quorum. So again, thank you, everyone. The first item on our agenda is approval of the draft agenda for today's meeting. An agenda was provided to all commission members. Any comment or discussion? And if not, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. And then again, unfortunately, we'll have to take a roll call vote for each of these. So just indicate yes or no or abstain when I call you. Dr. Buffalino?
Yes.
Dr. Dooley?
Yes.
Mr. Loftus?
Yeah.
Mr. McNamara?
Yes.
Mr. Oster?
Yes.
Ms. DeCastro?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Judge Mazzarelli? I think you're unmuted now, Judge.
yes.
Thank you. Dr. O'Neill
Yes.
and Dr. Walsh.
Yes.
All right, that motion carries. The next item we have is approval of the draft minutes from our March 11th, 2020 meeting. Those minutes were provided with the meeting materials. If there are any comments or discussion, now's the time. Otherwise, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the March 11th, 2020 meeting?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
And again, I have to take the vote by roll again. But Dr. Buffalino? If you can just indicate that you vote yes or no with regard to approving the minutes of the meeting.
It's muted. Can you hear me? Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Dooley?
Yes.
Mr. Loftus?
I abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
All right, that makes sense. Mr. McNamara?
Yes.
Mr. Oster?
Yes.
Ms. DeCastro?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Judge Mazzarelli? Just if, one more time, Judge, we couldn't hear you the first time.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. O'Neill
Yes.
and Dr. Walsh.
Abstain, I was not at that meeting.
All right, thank you. And that carries. Next on our agenda are accreditation and laboratory updates. This is number 4 on the agenda. The first item A is the Erie County Central Police Services Laboratory. There's an email chain dated April 21st of this year regarding a scope change. As I read it, the laboratory has requested to remove bank dye, which I thought was some technical term until I realized it's actually the dye in the bank packs that explodes, from their trace discipline. As I understand it, they just have not had any use for that, haven't had any occasion to use it. So they want to remove that from their material trace discipline. ANAB has indicated that they will remove it and update the scope. With regard to New York State accreditation, it's my understanding our accreditation covers the general discipline of material or trace, but doesn't get as specific as the ANAB in terms of getting right down to bank dye. So at least as I read it, I don't think there would be any need to make any change to the New York State accreditation. So this is just informational. There's no vote required. Any questions with regard to this item? Next, B, we have the Erie County Medical Examiner's Office Toxicology Laboratory. This is a letter dated May 6th of this year with regard to an extension of accreditation. ABFT has extended the expiration date of the lab's accreditation to September 30th of 2020 based on an offsite document review. The original expiration date was June 30th, but due to COVID-19, the full on-site inspection has been postponed. As I understand it, at least as of the date of the preparation of these materials, there was not a specific date set, but ABFT was anticipating being on-site during the summer. So in light of that, if there are any questions or discussion, I'll entertain that. And if not, I would suggest that we extend the New York State accreditation to that same September 30th, 2020 date that the ABFT accreditation was extended to, which will put it beyond the date of our next meeting. So any comment or discussion with regard to this item? And this is something that will be coming up again in the agenda with regard to other laboratories. All right, so if there is no discussion, do I have a motion to extend the New York State accreditation of the Erie County Medical Examiner Office of Toxicology Laboratory to September 30th of 2020?
I was sure, but yes, so moved.
I have a second.
Second, if I didn't so move.
Thank you. And again, I apologize for the clunkiness here, but we'll have to go through the roll for the vote. If you can just indicate yes, no, or abstain. Dr. Buffalino?
Yes.
Dr. Dooley?
Yes.
Mr. Loftus?
Yes.
Mr. McNamara?
Yes.
Mr. Oster?
Yes.
Ms. DeCastro?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Judge Mazzarelli?
Yes.
Dr. O'Neill?
Yes.
And Dr. Walsh?
Yes.
The next item on the agenda is item 4C, regards the Monroe County Crime Laboratory. There's a letter dated May 4th of this year regarding continuation of accreditation with documentation attached. As I read it, the laboratory has successfully completed the annual surveillance activity with no findings. ANAB has continued their accreditation. Again, this is informational. There's no vote required. Does anyone have any questions with regard to this item? Next, letter D, the Monroe County Office of the Medical Examiner, Forensic Toxicology Laboratory. There's a letter dated May 18th of this year with regard to an extension of accreditation, similar to the prior item. ABFT has extended the expiration of the lab's accreditation to September 30th of 2020. Again, based on an off-site document review. The original expiration date was June 30th, but due to COVID-19, the full on-site inspection was postponed. Again, as of the date of the preparation of these materials, there was no date set, but ABFT did anticipate being on site this summer. Any questions or discussion on this item? If not, do I have a motion to extend the New York State accreditation of the Monroe County Office of the Medical Examiner for Forensic Toxicology Laboratory to September 30th, 2020?
So moved.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
And again, we'll go through and take the vote by roll. Dr. Buffalino?
Yes. Sorry.
All right. New process for all of us. Dr. Dooley?
Yes.
Mr. Loftus?
Yes.
Mr. McNamara?
Yes.
Mr. Oster?
Yes.
Ms. DeCastro?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Judge Mazzarelli?
Yes.
Dr. O'Neill?
Yes.
And Dr. Walsh?
Yes.
Next, we have the Nassau County
Mike?
Office
It's
of the
Natasha.
Toxicology Laboratory.
Mike?
Yes.
Hi, it's Natasha. I've been freezing, so I haven't been hearing. Can we get your vote as well?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Never even dawned on me. So with regard to all of the items that we voted on so far, I will vote yes on all of them. And in the future, I'll also include myself. Thank you. All right. So,
Catch.
yes. So next we have the Nassau County Office of the Medical Examiner Toxicology Laboratory. There was a mid-cycle checklist that was received on May 15th of this year. As I read it, the lab submitted its mid-cycle self-inspection to ABFT for off-site review. At least as of the date of the preparation of the materials, it's my understanding that we have not yet received any feedback from ABFT regarding the status of the review. I don't know from staff if there is any update to that at this point or not.
There's no update, no.
All right, so it's not for a vote, it's for informational purposes. Any questions or comments with regard to this item? All right, next we have F, New York City OCME Department of Forensic Toxicology. Again, an email dated April 23rd of this year with regard to a mid-cycle review and attached documentation. Again, as I read the materials, it indicates that the lab submitted its mid-cycle self-inspection to ABFT for an off-site review. And again, as of the date of the preparation of these materials, the Office of Forensic Services had not yet received any feedback from ABFT regarding the status of the review of the material that was submitted. Again, from staff, any update yet at this point?
No update, no, same.
Jill, this is Shelley.
Shelley.
We got a letter very late yesterday for I believe it was this lab, but it just is a continuation of accreditation. So we will provide that to members in September. There's no vote needed, but it was just within 24 hours. So.
All right, so then we will provide that, and if there are any comments or discussion on that, we'll certainly entertain that at the September meeting. We can just make sure that that gets on the agenda for that meeting. Thank you. Next, G, we have the Niagara County Sheriff's Office Forensic Laboratory. There's an email chain dated March 12th of this year with regard to a change in management notification. There's a email chain dated March 31st of this year, again with an update to the change in management notification. Then there's documentation with regard to an on-site report from ANAB, and then a string of correspondence basically with regard to non-conformances and corrective action plans that were attached. As I read it, it looks like there was 8 non-conformances. It looked like the laboratory grouped those into 4 corrective action plans. Looks like the lab did submit those plans to ANAB for approval, and has implemented the corrective actions and notified ANAB. There's a correspondence, obviously, in the materials attached. There's also, I think, about 800 pages of additional correspondence. Commission members were emailed that is available upon request. With regard to the personnel change, it's my understanding that the QA manager left on April 11th. That date was then updated to April 13th. And that currently the lab director is acting as the QA manager. Do we have someone from the lab available, or can we get someone from the lab on the phone?
Yes, I'm Corey Gary, the lab director. I'm available.
All right. With regard, I guess, whether it's easier for you to talk about the 8 non-conformances, or if it's easier for you to group them into the 4 corrective actions, can you just give us a brief summary of what the issues were and what your lab has done to address them, and what you can tell us in terms of assurances that things are the way they should be now, and that the commission should be confident in the way the lab is running?
Sure. So the first one was grouped based on our documentation. There were a lot of, we had switched to Qualtrics at the end of last year, so that created a lot of confusion because some of our documents were not updated. The numbering system that we had weren't updated to the new Qualtrics numbering system. So they had deemed that a finding because they were referring to documents which didn't change, but the number changed. So they wrote that up. And then what they found was that we were doing things, but we did not exactly state them in our documents. So that is all of corrective action 1. And there were numerous ones that we grouped into that just because it all involved our documentation. That has all been updated, and all the new documents are now in Qualtrics with the correct numbers and have been sent to ANAB, to the lead assessor, and she closed that out and said it was resolved. Is there any questions on the first one?
Mike, I have a question.
Yes.
Scott, just to clarify, Corey, so the documents did exist. It was just clearly referencing them. And because the examiners already knew those documents, that's why it wasn't spotted earlier. Is that fair to say? It wasn't like these documents weren't okay.
Correct, that is true. We just were putting them into Qualtrics in electronic format, and they got new numbers because that's how Qualtrics works. It gives an ID number, but our references were referencing our old system.
And just in regards to the material that wasn't in the SOPs, those materials were literature, though. They were books, correct? Those were, people were following other documents. Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair. Yes, we were referencing books and stuff, but the assessors felt we should spell it out more clearly instead of referencing a book.
Okay, thank you.
I have a follow-up question with regard to that point. The auditor said that, and I couldn't, parse it out through the email chains, but I thought one of the issues with referencing the books was that sometimes in the notes they have different information or exceptions to the information, and they had asked that you readjust your manual, I guess, so that it detailed the procedures that the analysts were to follow. Did that happen? Like, what was referenced from the books, and what specifically did you do to correct that?
I believe you're referring to the trace section where we did not include the criteria. Is that correct? For fiber associations?
I think that's right.
Okay, yeah. So on site, she had said to me that the analyst was following the proper procedure, and in his notes on the note pages, the criteria was all laid out on our note pages, so she knew he was looking at the correct criteria, but in our manual, that wasn't really specified what criteria they should be looking at. So we just basically took the note pages and put it into the manual.
The note pages, there was some correspondence, and I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, about referencing either books or other reference guides from the manual. Like the manual would cite to a reference guide. It doesn't specify what, and they found that to be inadequate. And then they had asked that the whatever the procedures were to be expressly written in the manual.
I don't have that email, but I'd have to read the email in order to answer it correctly.
All right, you can continue. I'll try and track it down and to see which one.
David, sorry, my recollection was that, and Corey, please correct me if I'm wrong, it was that the assessor made the point that having it in a book would not be sufficient because it's unclear if the potential for someone not to follow the book, it wouldn't be clear. They could exclude certain criteria in the book, and it wouldn't be clear if they did so. So I don't know if it was suggested that actually happened, Corey, but I think it was the potential for that to happen. That's why it should be not in the book, but in the procedures. So it's clear to the examiner what they're doing and what they're following.
Yeah, on page 3612, in answer to, it looks like it's 8.11, in materials, the laboratory's procedures does not include analytical criteria to make fiber associations. It was the fiber associations. The answer to that initially was the analyst uses criteria set forth in reference books, which are cited in the lab manual. Those criteria are not specifically in the procedure manual. Then there were a series of conversations about whether it was adequate to reference for the procedure manual to reference the reference books. And I thought the auditors suggested that because the procedural manuals may not be consistent on a particular process, that the specific procedure that you were to use was to go into the manual itself.
Yeah, I mean, on site, and my understanding from the assessor was that there was no question about the procedure that we were using. It just is that it was not documented in our manuals, and she wanted us to clearly state that. I'm trying to find the emails right now.
Is it now documented in your manuals? Is that part of the plan for resolution that is now moved out of the reference book and into the manuals?
It is, every procedure now is in the manual. All the criteria for every procedure now is in our manual for trace.
So if they were to, there's no need for them to use the reference books now because it would be in the procedure, correct?
That is correct.
I'm sorry, that's all I have for that one.
Okay. So I'll move on. The next was we had weights that were not sent out, and by the end of last year, they were sent out in January. They came back. We went through and checked our weights because we check them every day of use. So when those certificates came back that the weights were okay, we went and verified with our daily check-ins and everything was okay. So we deemed them acceptable. And we now have a plan in place. Since the quality manager had left, I have set up, we have it in Qualtrics now where the certificates expire, and we also have calendar reminders to let us know that the weights are coming up for recalibration.
Super quick question on that. I think there was a typo later and it said that the weights, the expiration date was October 2018, but it was 2019?
Correct, it was 2019.
Okay.
Okay, the next one was involving vendors, certificates. We had checked them, but we didn't print out the physical certificate for updating the vendor accreditation. All the vendors were re-accredited and their accreditation had not expired, but we did not have the physical certificate printed to show the assessor. So she wrote it up as a finding. But all of them have.
I'm sorry, that was under 6.6?
That was, yep, 6.6.2C. And we have since reprinted them. They are now in our Qualtrics system with expiration dates, so we will not miss them in the future.
So Corey, I'm sorry, because I must have misread it. So clearly the vendors were still accredited. It just wasn't, you had the documentation updated. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. And the last one involved our internal audit. When our quality manager performed the audit, we did not do it to the new AR 3125 requirements, and we had therefore no witnessing. We have updated all of our audit procedures to incorporate that. So all of our new internal audit documents now include the new standards, which include the witnessing. I am in the process of doing the audit. Unfortunately, we are reopening next week, so we haven't been in to really perform the whole audit, so it is in progress.
And so the only discrepancy wasn't one of procedure, it was just that nobody witnessed it. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yeah, we didn't do any witnessing.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Mike, I don't know if Corey can answer this, but just I'm sure we're all going through the same situation. But Corey, do you have any inkling whether the quality assurance manager position will be posted? Because it's very difficult for a lab director to be the quality assurance manager at the same time. That's what I've been doing for the past 6 months. So.
Yes, I mean, I'm a previous quality manager from Erie County, so I have a good handle, but unfortunately the position, we literally, with March 16th, we were ready to post it and then we closed. They have taken the position away from us, which it was a tox, so it was kind of both tox and quality assurance, and I'm in the process of fighting to get it back.
But based on your prior position, you're in a lot better position than I would say most lab directors if they've not served as a quality assurance manager before.
Yes, yeah, I was the quality assurance manager for 8 years, so, and I was very up to date on all the standards and handling stuff. So I feel comfortable, but at the same time, you know,
yes,
I need somebody.
Thank you, Corey.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments?
Pat, go ahead and unmute yourself and you can ask.
I figured that out after an hour. Good morning, Corey.
Good morning.
The other question is so you've lost the quality assurance title, but you've also lost the assistant lab director title. Is that
Yeah.
something that's going to be reinstated?
So it wasn't exactly a title. It was more or less just an assignment so that when I wasn't here, you know, they knew who would take care of the stuff. I have reassigned my other toxicologist to take care of those duties when I'm not here. But
this is more for ABFT and ANAB accreditation, because I do see it says organizational chart. Okay. It's not a title, it's a responsibility.
Yes.
Commissioner, I think you're muted.
I was talking to myself here. Corey, I was just saying thank you for being with us and for sharing the information with us. We appreciate it. And as Scott indicated, I unfortunately think it's a situation a lot of us are in, but we appreciate the work you're doing with the challenges that you have. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next, we have the Onondaga County Department of Forensic Toxicology. Again, there's a email chain dated May 18th of this year with regard to a mid-cycle review. The lab, as I read the materials, did submit its mid-cycle inspection to ABFT. It looks like the reviewers did have questions regarding some of the proficiency test results. The lab, as I read it, did respond, and it looked like ABFT didn't have any further questions. This is informational. There is no vote required. Does anyone have any questions or any comments with regard to this item? Next, we have the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. This is item I on the agenda, 4I. There's an email dated March 31st of this year with regard to a change in key management. As I read it, Assistant Chief Dan Burhans has retired effective March 27th, and Don Doler has been named Acting Assistant Chief. Jill or Shelley or anyone on staff, was there any other information about these roles or how they fit into the lab hierarchy?
Not that I was aware of. I don't believe they submitted anything else, just the letter of notification.
I did reach out to the QA manager, and she is on if you had a question, but
Yeah, I'm sorry, who is that?
Connie Dinkle. Connie, could you unmute yourself if you're...
Hi, Connie, can you hear me?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Hi, good morning.
Thank you for being with us. Could you just tell us how this assistant chief position, where does that fit in the hierarchy within the lab? And how does that relate to the lab director, for example, or other positions? And what are the responsibilities of the assistant chief?
So historically, the position was called chief and assistant chief back when we had uniform personnel in the laboratory. We no longer have uniform personnel, but civil service never changed the title to director and assistant director. But essentially, the position of assistant chief is to take on any responsibilities if the chief is unavailable. He works with all of the budget and paperwork pertaining to budgets in the state. He supervises all of the staff in the front end of the admin office, and he also coordinates all of the crime scene duties.
All right, that helps. Thank you. And Don Doler, is that someone who came up through the lab?
Yes, he was the supervisor of the trace evidence section.
All right. All right, thank you. I don't have any further questions. I don't know if anyone else does. All right, thank you. Appreciate your being with us and appreciate the information.
Sure thing. Have a great day.
Thanks. Next, we have the Suffolk County Office of Chief Medical Examiner Toxicology Laboratory. similar to other items we've had before, there's a letter dated May 18th of this year with regard to an extension of accreditation. And again, the ABFT has extended the accreditation to September 30th. Originally it was due to expire June 30th, but because of COVID-19, the on-site inspection couldn't be held. They're waiting for a date, but anticipate it will happen this summer. If there's no other discussion, do I have a motion to extend the New York State accreditation of the Suffolk County Office of Chief Medical Examiner Toxicology Laboratory to September 30th of 2020?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Pat, was that you?
Second.
Thank you. Again, we'll have to go through the roll call, just indicate yes, no, or abstain. So Mike Green, yes. Dr. Buffalino,
Yes.
Dr. Dooley,
Yes.
Mr. Loftus,
Yes.
Mr. McNamara,
Yes.
Mr. Osterer,
Yes.
Ms. DeCastro,
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick,
Yes.
Judge Mazzarelli,
Yes.
Dr. O'Neill,
Yes.
and Dr. Walsh.
Yes.
All right, so that carries. Thank you. Next, letter K, we have the Westchester County Division of Forensic Sciences. Again, email dated April 17th of this year with regard to an extension of accreditation. The ANAB has extended the expiration date of the lab's accreditation, as I read this, until January 31st of 2021. The original expiration date was August 31st of 2020, but due to COVID, the full on-site inspection has been postponed until October of 2020. So given the October 2020 date, obviously no way that we would get anything for our fall meeting, and I think it'd be questionable as to whether or not everything would be done for a December meeting. I'm open to other suggestions, but absent any other suggestions, I would suggest that we extend the New York State accreditation of the Westchester County Department of Labs and Research Division of Forensic Sciences to January 31st of 2021 to run concurrently then with the extension that ANAB is granted. So any comment or discussion? If not, do I have a motion?
Mike, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So their assessment's going to be on October, but we would have to probably vote in December, correct? Because the next meeting wouldn't be to March. So I'm just saying January 31st seems like it might not be enough.
Yeah, so I guess I'm a little uncomfortable going too far beyond that. So you're right on that, but I guess what I'd suggest, we're already going 2 meetings out, so let's put it on the agenda for the December meeting. Even if everything's not finished, maybe we'll at least have some indication as to what happened during the assessment.
Hi, this is Bob Adabo from Westchester County. If it makes anyone feel better, we were just looking at our gap analysis by our lead inspector, and we're looking pretty good. So, and given the fact, of course, knock on wood, given the fact that the last 4 audits we haven't had any findings, I think we should probably be good for the December meeting, but you never know.
All right, thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. All right, do I have a motion as indicated to extend it to January 31st, 2021?
Yes, this is Scott. Scott makes a motion.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, and again, we'll go through the roll. Mike Green votes yes. Dr. Buffalino?
Yes.
Dr. Dooley?
Vote yes.
Mr. Loftus?
Yes.
Mr. McNamara?
Yes.
Mr. Osterer?
Yes.
Ms. DeCastro?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Dr. O'Neill?
Yes.
And Dr. Walsh?
You missed Judge Mazzarella?
You missed me, Judge Mazzarelli.
I'm sorry, Judge.
That's all right.
Judge Mazzarelli,
I vote yes also.
thank you. My apologies. Do we get?
Okay. I'm uncharacteristically quiet today.
Did we get a vote for Dr. Walsh?
Yes, we did.
Thank you. All right. Next, we have letter L, Westchester County Division of Forensic Toxicology. There's an email dated April 29th of this year with regard to mid-cycle inspection and attached documentation. As I read it, the lab has submitted its mid-cycle inspection to ABFT for review. They did that on April 29th. As of the date, at least, of the preparing of these materials, the Office of Forensic Services had not yet received any feedback from ABFT regarding the status of the review. Any update from staff on this?
Shelley, did anything come in late with the others or no?
No.
No. Nope, not yet.
All right, any discussion or comment with regard to this item? I assume all of these where we've had this situation will be on the agenda at our next meeting, hopefully with responses from ABFT.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. All right, that concludes our accreditations and updates. Next, under old business, we have a familial search update. Jill, if you could take us through that, please.
Absolutely. So for the familial search program, we've had 37 applications in total. 30 are unique, 6 are resubmissions, and 1 renewal application, totaling 37. Out of the applications, we've had 2 withdrawn now, 12 have been rejected, and 23 were approved. 12 searches have been completed, and there are still 11 in the search queue. So since our last meeting, just those updates, we've had 1 additional withdrawal of applications. We have 1 further in review, and we have an additional search completed.
Hey, Jill, on that first stat, you said there were 6 something.
Submissions.
And then what was the 1?
1 renewal, meaning that the
What's the
period,
difference?
the time period has passed where they received results and would like to renew their application so that another search can be done.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
This is Ann. I was just wondering what the 2 withdrawals, what reason they gave?
In both circumstances, I believe that they had information from another source, so they needed to exhaust that lead.
So I'm not sure I understand. When we say we've completed them, does that mean that there's been a result that has been referred to the law enforcement, or there's been no result? What does that mean?
That includes both. So when we say a search is completed, that means that either there were names released or not names released, just that the process itself had been completed and that we've informed the applicants.
So how many have resulted in names being released? Do we know that?
Yes, in let me just say 4 of the 12.
And do we follow in any way what happens after the names are released?
Yes, they're obligated to provide updates every 6 months to us regarding how they're progressing with the information they were given.
And what is the progress of those 4 names that were released?
We had no cases have been closed at this time due to it, so they're still investigating.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Jill. Next, again, is an informational update. We have the genetic genealogy item that we've been carrying Dr. Walsh, any update, given the workload that the Department of Health has on its plate right now?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I've been doing nothing but COVID-19 since March 5th. I hope to get back to some of my other duties in June, but I'm not positive. The COVID-19 obviously has priority over everything else here.
We certainly understand and appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks.
Next item, at the March meeting, the commission had asked for an update from NICLAC regarding the status of the lab's implementation of changes to comply with the discovery law. Obviously since that time, with COVID, there've been a lot of complications. So I don't know if there is any update. Bill, do you have?
Yeah, I don't know if Scott wants to say anything about it, but I was gonna suggest we postpone that at least till September. Because I think it's just too hard to differentiate between which disaster has been more impactful on the labs, Discovery or Corona. So I don't know if Scott agrees with that, but if he does, I'd move to just adjourn it till September.
Are you asking him to agree to the characterization of the discovery law changes as a disaster as well, or?
No, I know. I know everybody's got to toe the company line. I'm not going to get that controversial. I just want him to.
No, I don't disagree that it's very hard to differentiate between the different things, but Judge, you want to make a point?
I just wanted to add to this that it's been a big increase in our business because the new law has a provision in it that's very unusual and allows for either the prosecutor or the defense to make an application to one judge of the appellate division to rule on the discovery. And it's kind of a complicated thing, but it dramatically increased the business at the appellate division first department and in the event.
Thank you. Scott, from the lab director's standpoint, thoughts, anything you want to tell us with regard to discovery at this point? And also would like your thoughts on Bill's suggestion about putting this over till September.
I'm fine with putting over till September to go into more details. I just would like to, we did meet with the lab directors over a teleconference and we did have a deep discussion on the questions that Commissioner Fitzpatrick had sent to us. I think, like you said, it's very hard to, with the new discovery laws that had only been in place for a couple of months and the district attorney's offices were still finding their feet as we were finding ours. So we did see a change in the workload, but then COVID came and that changed again. And so I think it is good to push it to September. But I would like to just say, if you don't mind, just a couple of seconds on one of the questions was, has there been any instances which the lab failed to meet the deadline, either discovery or testing? And based upon the phone call we had a couple, that was no. And I wanted to mention that because of the tremendous work all the labs had put in the last 6 months, well, almost a year, sorry, to get ready for that January 1st deadline. So I just wanted to make that point. I thought that was good to hear. But I definitely think we can have more discussion in September. But a lot of work was done and we managed to attain that goal. And there's still a lot of work to be done. But I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So there's no objection. There's not a vote required here, but I would ask that we put this on the September agenda, and hopefully things will get back to, closer to normal or baseline. And Scott, if you could, make sure and communicate with the lab directors before that meeting and give us feedback in September, we'd appreciate it.
Will do.
Thank you. Next item, D, is to do with the partial match and familial search policy review and recommendations for changes.
Mike?
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's Fitz. Before we go on to D, there was a second prong to the questioning regarding marijuana, whether or not the labs are capable of complying with the new law. I'm especially curious because we just arrested a guy 2 days ago with 200 pounds of marijuana on 81. And I don't know whether I'm supposed to give him the good news yet or not. You remember what I'm talking? Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
I did ask the lab directors to give me an update in regards to where they stand with the new marijuana law change with the quantitative analysis. And most of the laboratories are working towards a validated method. A validated method are currently still in the process of validating that method. And most of the laboratories are months away from getting that validated based upon the circumstances we're currently in. But there are also changes that were coming to the law prior to COVID that was going to change the ground rules again in regards to concentrated cannabis. And that would cause even more work on the laboratories to do different analysis. So right now we're still trying to ascertain what is going to be the ground rules for marijuana testing in regards to wanting THC. I do understand there are private vendors that can perform this analysis, but right now across the state, either labs are working on it or labs are waiting to purchase equipment to work on it. And that was again before the COVID.
So to boil it down, marijuana cases are unprosecutable today.
Well, down the laboratories in the state don't have validated methods to perform the testing. There are, like I said, other private companies that do perform that testing. I can't speak to the quality of their testing, but I understand they are accredited. They do perform that testing.
Okay, where are they, Scott?
I don't know if I should be mentioning a particular vendor on a public, but I can speak to you about it afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure Kathy would know, so thanks.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So next we have item D.
Mike?
Yes.
It's Natasha. I'm sorry. I've been in and out all this entire meeting. For the NICLAC update, we had at the last meeting requested an update for this meeting. So it was voted on to have it. And since we're not having it and we are pushing it off to September, I would suggest a vote to move it on to the next meeting, if that's okay with you.
Sure. Do we have a motion to push this over to the September meeting?
So moved.
We have a second?
Second.
All right. I vote yes. Dr. Buffalino?
Votes yes.
Dr. Dooley? Mr. Loftus?
Abstain.
Mr. McNamara?
Last meeting, so I don't know the full nature of it. I'll catch up.
All right. Mr. McNamara?
Yes.
Mr. Oster?
Yes.
Mr. Castro?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Judge Mazzarelli?
Yes.
Dr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Dr. Walsh?
Yes.
All right, thank you. All right, so next we have the partial match and familial search policy review and changes. And if you recall, when we adopted the familial search policy, we agreed to revisit the policy and look at it on a regular basis. Staff has done that with input from both the DNA subcommittee and from this commission. Included in your packets, I believe, are marked versions of a partial match policy, a familial search policy, and an implementation plan. The documents, I believe, incorporate the changes discussed by the commission. The DNA subcommittee, at their last meeting, as I understand it, did review the documents. That was at their May meeting. They provided additional comments. They voted to recommend, as I understand it, the draft revisions to the commission. So at this point, I would open it up if there are any questions, comments.
Mike?
Yes.
So with respect to the implementation plan. Since we're updating it, there's reference to data under the number of samples anticipated to be included in their database that references 2004 statistics, saying that there's 150,000 specimens that were collected from qualifying offenders. Maybe we could just bring those numbers, they could bring those numbers current. And my second would be under also under implementation. That was on page 91 of our materials. On page 104 of our materials, it reflects that the sole purpose for enabling the profiles, racial classifications to be used is for the construction of frequency databases. I think that there may be for issues of transparency, and I think there's consideration of an amendment to criminal procedure law that we may be publishing the numbers of the constituencies of the databases. In other words, the numbers of the racial breakdown of people or specimens that are in the database. So I don't know that the sole purpose of the maintenance of the database is just for frequency.
So if I could just say something regarding the implementation plan specifically, when we review, when we reviewed these documents, we took a look at them with the 2 amendments that we were looking to make to each, the partial match and the familial search. And we did update some things that I noticed were out of compliance, like the number of core loci, because that has increased. But in discussion with the state police, they would like to take a closer look at specifically just the implementation plan to make edits and changes to that. So I think, when we're just looking at the amendments that we're looking to make to partial match and familial search, the edits are reflected there. Anything additional, again, we would be digging into deeper, and I'm just wondering if maybe we could look at a full overhaul of the implementation plan, separate and aside from these policy changes.
That would be fine. I'd be interested, and I think for transparency purposes, given the controversies that we're currently confronted with, that the numbers of Black, Caucasian, and other constituencies be published. And to say that the sole reason to keep those statistics and not being able to share those statistics. So I'd welcome the opportunity that we look at it in the future.
Thank you. Jill, if you could refresh my memory on one thing here. My recollection is there was some discussion at the DNA subcommittee. Well, just to back up. So one of the issues that had been raised was the issue of whether or not this should be available for testing on unidentified human remains in a case that was being investigated as a criminal investigation. And we actually had an application, and because of what we thought was an ambiguity, my recollection is that we did not accept that, but that we brought it up. And then I think there was some discussion at the DNA subcommittee where folks were suggesting that maybe it should be broader than unidentified remains and should include missing persons, which I was somewhat confused about. But as the documents that are presented to us here are drafted, would the expansion be limited to just to unidentified human remains in that forensic context, or is it broader than that?
It's my understanding the way that we have done the edits, it's that, and also talking to the state police, that it is just cases where there is an unidentified human, unidentified remains.
All right.
This is Ann. I actually had a question about that as well, because in the document on page 76, the CRR changes in AA, says the phrase unidentified human remain, and then parentheses remains, index refers to the electronic database in CODIS containing DNA profiles developed from recovered deceased domains or from an individual who cannot or will not identify themselves. So I was confused by that.
If
So
I
we
can,
sorry.
Jill, is it correct to say that that is a CODIS definition as opposed to our definition? We're simply stating there what the CODIS definition is as opposed to saying it's one of our definitions?
Correct, yes.
So then the proposed changes would allow using familial searching to try and identify human remains. And my other question is that any human remains, where there's been sufficient investigation prior to the request, or is it only in cases linked to some suspected crime? I wasn't clear on that from the way things are worded as well. Because on case requirements, it looks like it has to be, the profile has to be associated with one of the listed crimes or a specific safety threat.
Correct, yes, and so as you said, the case requirements would need to be met first in order for that. So you have to basically look at the sample requirements need to be met once the case requirements have been met. So it would need to be one of those criteria that's listed.
So does that take this option away from investigation of a lot of cases where it might be useful? Where let's say there's somebody comes across the body in the Adirondacks and there's no leads to investigate who that might be, no evidence of a crime. There's still, I think, a public interest in trying to use this method to find out who that person was.
And I think, so first of all, I think that's a good point, and I don't disagree that there could be scenarios where there's utility. But going back to our original mindset, I think we tried to be very restrictive when we drafted these regulations with the idea that we were going to start with a very tight, controlled group of cases, see what our experience was and see whether or not we should expand. So the proposal is to expand, and I think it would be fair to say that it doesn't cover the universe of scenarios where this might be helpful, but it does cover the one scenario where we actually had an application and someone wanted to use it, and we felt there was an ambiguity. And the state police can speak to this better than I, but as I understand it, capacity is still an issue. So, I think expanding slowly and carefully, both given the policy issues and given the capacity issue, were part of the thought process behind limiting this. So I don't disagree with you that that's an area, and I think there are other areas, where we could say, hey, this might be helpful, but I think that was the reasoning as to why it was limited. I don't know, Jill, if you have other thoughts, or if someone from the state police is on and wants to comment with regard to capacity.
So I do know Ray is on the line, but also if I could just say, I agree with what you've said. I want to let you know that, when the applications do come in, they cross my desk. So I'm familiar with what circumstances or situations come up. Again, as Mike referenced, we did have one of the unidentified human remains that we had to reject due to the wording of the policy, and that kind of sparked this. So I would like to think that we would still have an open dialogue where if we found a niche that we didn't address, that we can then go in, incorporate that, talk with the state police, see if it's possible. Again, there are CODIS restrictions and things of that nature. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ray and see if he has any input.
Okay, just fumbling with the mute. Is everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so certainly I just echo your statements are correct. Our concern is that if UHR is totally open, there are, especially you look at the COVID situation, a lot of individuals potentially fall in the category. So certainly limiting that to homicide victims. And I think to the definition question from Dr. Walsh, if I might, my understanding, trying to cover the situation where there might be a victim of a serious crime who didn't pass, so and would not be able to identify themselves. So it's kind of a niche thing, as opposed to remains just an unidentified individual. So certainly we are ramping up production in terms of when we started out just working on one case per time at a time. Now we're doing multiple cases at the same time. But then also noting that COVID has been a huge impact on the lab as well. So certainly we're trying to ramp things up, and we are certainly able to do more types of cases, certainly, but are concerned UHRs, we can do those, particularly valuable, I think, for victims of crime. But we're just concerned about the large number that if it's wide open, what that would do to the cases that are under investigation.
Thank you, Ray. Other, and any other, follow up or?
Well, in the search policy, we're still restricting the requests to a police agency or a prosecutor. Those would be the limited sources. It actually says an appropriate prosecutor. I don't know what appropriate, but it does limit it to police agency or prosecutor for making the request.
Yes, but there is the expansion that a defendant can request through the law enforcement agency or prosecutor as well on their behalf. They could do it for the defendant.
Where does that appear?
Oh boy, you're going to test me here, aren't you?
No, then Jill, I'll talk to you another time about it. It's not necessary to burden the meeting.
That is
It's in the second paragraph of the policy, Jill. The second paragraph of the intro.
Do we have a page number on our?
Is that 69?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you. I got it.
This is why Shelley comes to the rescue. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley.
No problem.
And this is Ann again, just one quick thing that I think on page 103, it looks like there's a reference to an old technology here. They're talking about samples that are being run on a gel. Somebody might want to just take a look at that.
Was this on the policy?
This is on the implementation plan.
Okay. So when we take a look at that, we'll make a note. Like I said, I think there was, some discussion about us looking at the implementation plan more in depth and making that a little bit more accurate. So we'll make a note of that.
So this isn't a comprehensive on the implementation plan. We'll be getting back to that.
I think so, yes. We just didn't feel that if we could have the time constraints met if we wanted to get through with the partial match and familial search amendments. So
could we commit to, say, by December meeting, having a revised draft of the implementation plan between the state police and the Office of Forensic Services, at least having a proposal?
I would just ask one question of Natasha is, do we need this implementation plan to be approved in order for the policy changes and reg changes to take effect? Because I wouldn't want to delay implementing those.
No, I was suggesting, if folks are of the mindset, approve the whole thing as it is, with the understanding that we're committing to bring another revised implementation plan before the commission in December.
OFS can commit to that. And
Ray, is that doable from the state police side?
Yes, that's fine. And I concur. We did look at the implementation plan, saw quite a number of other changes that do need updating. And we do agree they can be done separately. And we agree that we will work with DCGS and others to make it by December. Thank you.
No, thank you. All right, any other comment or discussion with regard to these revisions to the regulations or implementation plan?
Sure. Just super briefly, I just wanted to make clear that, my silence was that I'm abstaining from the discussion because prior to joining the commission, of course, I sued the commission. And I do think emphatically that, giving information or private information or database information to law enforcement is emphatically the job of the legislator. It should be governed by the legislature. It's a process that anticipates citizen, state, police involvement. It affects communities of color disproportionately, and I just think those stakeholders need to be at the table when you're talking about how we give information to police, how they investigate cases, et cetera, et cetera. For those reasons, I'm abstaining from the discussion. I just want to make that part of it clear. So, yeah.
No, thank you. We appreciate your comments, and they're noted on the record here.
Mike, I had a few things. A lot of it is more just some typos and what have you, but I did have a couple of questions. I could go through it fairly quickly, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So on page 70, number 4, it says have been searched, and it should be have been searched. And then on page 72, let's see, find it. Okay. I'm sorry, on page 71, there is, it looks like E2 is crossed out. In the case that the case and sample requirements have been satisfied, the requesters will be notified. I wasn't sure whether that 2 still needed to be there or if all of that was being included under, or I should say lowercase I. Is it all just being included under lowercase I?
Lydia, let me just take a look real quick at that.
Okay.
I believe that's a mistake. So it looks to me as I should not be crossed out.
Okay. Then on page 72, see. Uh, 5A lower case IV. The information, you got that? Reporting familial DNA search results. 5A lowercase IV. This is page 72. It says the information provided shall be treated only as an investigative lead. So my general question is, how would we know? If we're saying it shall be treated only as, then how would we be able to confirm, for want of a better word, actually know that that's the only way the information is being used? And I'm not looking for an answer now, but it just popped in my head as a general question.
So Lydia, if I could just chime in and let you know that one of the things that we do during the trainings or any notification once a search result is complete is that this information is an investigative lead only. So we do specifically say that and present that information to both the district attorney and law enforcement representatives, so they are aware of that.
Okay. Couple more things. On page 73, at the bottom, letter D, The last portion of the sentence, it says, is a violation of state uppercase S and federal lowercase f. Do we want it uppercase for federal?
We can do that, yes.
Okay. And then lastly, where am I? I'm not sure if I'm moving into a different, I may be moving into a different document, so I may be a little premature. Is page 100 and, sorry, 106 in a different document?
I think that's the implementation plan.
Okay.
Certainly, if you have comments there, by all means, note them.
That's my last comment. Thank you all for listening.
No, thank you for the feedback. Appreciated.
For letter F, post-implementation actions, the beginning of the sentence was crossed out. The DNA subcommittee shall conduct A. And now the sentence is starting off with a post-implementation review to determine of the DNA data bank in meeting the defined and implied objectives of executive law. That seems to be a sentence fragment to me now.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, sorry, I was fumbling with the unmute. Definitely a fragment.
Okay. So now that needs to be reworded to preserve the intent of what that sentence is supposed to read.
May I go back to Lydia's prior comment regarding on page 72, 5, small Roman numeral IV? The information provided shall be treated only as an investigative lead. Is that part of what the follow-up makes sure is happening?
Yes. Oh, yeah, okay. Sorry, I was just checking. I was unmuted on that. No, again, once they submit a follow-up or an update to us, we do take a look at that and make sure that the update kind of coincides with how the information presented them should have been digested and utilized. So I think we do cover all the bases. Again, we look at all these documents very thoroughly, and we hassle them. They know if they've submitted that we'll be on them for updates and things of that nature. So
it is also stressed very heavily in the training.
Okay, I'm done. I'm done.
thank you,
Thank you,
Lydia.
everybody. You're welcome.
Thank you, Lydia. We appreciate it.
So then, Natasha, if we're making these changes, even though they're minor, to clean these up, can we still vote on this with the changes as reflected at the meeting, or do we need to have them made and have it brought back?
Well, everything's going back to the DNA subcommittee. So you'll be voting on the draft revisions, and you will also be voting on any other considerations that you have that you want the DNA subcommittee to review when it goes back to them. And I also want to add that once the DNA subcommittee, does, or I should say the final product, when everything's all said and done, the regulations are going to go through the Department of State's public comment period. So the public is going to receive information on their regs if they want to express their views. So if there are any particular organizations or groups that you want, interested parties.
I'm sorry, you cut out on us, Natasha.
You can see a copy and can provide their comments.
So I understand the process. Because we've made changes here to what the DNA subcommittee sent us, we have to once we vote on something, it has to go back to them because we're making changes.
Oh, she's muted.
I think she's buffering.
Okay, so I was frozen, so I don't know what part you heard that I said.
No, I think we got most of it. You're saying it had to go through the Department of State process and interested parties could comment. But my question was just on general process, just so I understand. Because we've made changes to what the DNA subcommittee recommended to us, it has to go back to them now?
Correct.
All right, so if we vote on something now, we're just voting on basically a draft to send back to the DNA subcommittee.
Correct.
All right. So then what I would ask is if I can have a motion to revise the regulations as reflected in the materials that were sent to the commission members and consistent with the changes that were just recommended in our discussion for the purposes of sending it back to the DNA subcommittee, hopefully for their approval, and then back to us for final approval. Again, subject to the Department of State process. So do I have a motion? Then this would be both for the draft regulations and for the implementation plan, with the understanding that the implementation plan would again be redone and a draft would be brought back to the commission at our December meeting. So with that understanding, do I have a motion?
So moved.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, I vote yes. Dr. Buffalino? I'm sorry, Pat, I didn't get that.
Some prompt came up and I couldn't do anything. The vote is yes.
All right, thank you. Dr. Dooley?
My vote is yes.
Mr. Loftus?
Stay.
Mr. McNamara?
Yes.
Mr. Oster?
Yes.
DeCastro?
Yes.
Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Yes.
Judge Mazzarelli?
Yes.
Dr. O'Neill?
Yes.
And Dr. Walsh?
Yes.
All right, that carries. Under new business, the one item we have, we've been having some discussion within the Office of Forensic Services. As I understand it right now, the regulations currently specifically refer to the ISO 17025 standard, and that's the only standard referred to in there. We've had discussions about fingerprinting, and I think the commission generally has indicated a desire to try and have both the Office of Forensic Services, DCJS, and the commission do what they can to encourage fingerprinting to be done in an accredited environment. We've also had issues in the past with regard to the computer type or digital laboratories in their work and whether or not they're subject to the scope of the commission. But in any event, I think some people feel that 17020 might be more appropriate with regard to fingerprint laboratories or with regard to digital laboratories. So this is nothing that we need a vote on today, but just something that I think we should start to think about as a commission is whether or not we want to continue to limit accreditation under the commission to 17025, or whether or not we want to think about allowing 17020 accreditation with regard to certain disciplines. So again, I'm not expecting a vote or a decision today, but it's something I think that we should be thinking about as a commission. If anyone has any preliminary things they want to put out there for folks to think about as we look at this issue, certainly happy to give anyone the opportunity to do that.
I have just a question, Mike. So is 17020 a possibility for all comparative disciplines, or just, you did say it wasn't held for just latent prints? Would it be the other comparative disciplines, firearms, or is this something that we're considering for latent prints?
I think unless there's something I'm missing, I think that would be, those would be issues for the commission to address. I think the way our regulations are drafted right now, it's not an option for anyone. For New York State accreditation, I think we could go through the process and propose changes to the regs. And if they went all the way through the process and succeeded, I think we could shape those as we wanted. Obviously it would have to be consistent with what our other accrediting bodies did as well.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, at least initial thoughts or comments here? All right, then what I would suggest is maybe we can put this on as an item at our next meeting, and at least have a proposal, a written proposal for the commission to react to at that time.
Yes, I was thinking that we needed something like that.
All right. Is that okay with you, Bill? I'm just giving you a hard time.
Come on, we had 2 shootings already today. Jesus.
Just giving you a hard time. All right, so then we will put this on the agenda for the next meeting, and we'll have a written proposal for people to react to. Next and last on the agenda are laboratory disclosures. First, we have the Nassau County Division of Forensic Sciences. There's an email from March 10th regarding closure of a non-conformance. There's an email from March 12th regarding initial notification and acknowledgement of a non-conformance. As I read it, relating to a statistical sampling error. And then an email dated March 16th with regard to an initial notification acknowledgement of a non-conformance with regard to an injection time protocol issue. So I don't know, is there anything that, I guess, are there questions or comments anyone has, or anything that you want to add at this time regarding these?
I guess for the statistical sampling error, it's kind of broad and kind of general. It's just curious as to what exactly the sampling error was. It said it affected 3 analysts, perhaps 8 cases. What specifically was the error, and what are the chances it affected results in any case?
Hi, it's Mark Gill from the Nassau County Lab. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. So these were chemistry assignments for the analysis of controlled substances where stat sampling was performed. So the issue centered around the random selection portion of the procedure as a result of a deficiency in the training program. So it was isolated to a specific scenario when individual evidence items were bundled or grouped together. So for example, if the case contained bundles of glassines, some of the analysts were randomly selecting the bundle and then sequentially testing those individual units rather than returning that bundle back into the population to be available for random selection again. So we notified the DA's office about those cases. We recalled those cases. We're in the process of finishing up that investigation. We instructed the analysts how to sample properly, and any new cases are being observed by the technical leader. So for the 8 cases,
sorry.
I'm sorry. So for the 8 cases that we potentially identified in the beginning, we've actually drilled that down to 5 at this point, just because the way the samples were originally packaged. In 3 of those cases, they were loosely packaged in a container, so there was no issue with the bundling or grouping of those items.
And as to the issue concerning the injection times, one was the injection time used was 15. Was 15 was supposed to be 9. The second one was 15. It was supposed to be 12 using different machines. How might that affect the overall testing?
So I don't know if I have Karen Dooling on the line here, but I can probably.
It's on here too.
Okay. Do you want to take care of this, Karen, or you want me to do it?
Yeah, so the incident that Mark was speaking of was in the drug section. Separate corrective action in the biology section. One of our 3500 instruments was not set properly for the injection protocol on the instrumentation. So I'm assuming that's the one you want to discuss now.
I thought there were two separate ones. One, the injection time was supposed to be 15 seconds. And either I'm conflating them. One was 15:9, one was 15:12.
Right. One is 15:9 and one is 15:12. The 15:9 is the global filer, and the 15:12 is YSTR cases.
So I can, am I unmuted here? I think I am. So essentially, they're different assays for global filer and for the male-specific test YSTR. So we validated for 9 seconds, and we looked at 9, we looked at 12 and 15. We chose 9-second injection as our time. So essentially what happened was, and we don't know if it happened during the move from the medical examiner's office to the new lab. We don't know if it happened through a vendor who was doing the performance checks for from the instruments to assure that nothing occurred during the move. But essentially, you can see it as there's an assay and there's an instrument protocol. And you can see it as a folder that has another folder inside. The outer folder said 9 seconds. However, the inner folder was programmed to inject for 15 seconds. And essentially what it does is it increases, or it should increase, the RFU heights. So our investigation is looking at the data to see if it was affected in any way. Are the RFUs 3 times, 4 times, 5 times greater than they're supposed to be? And do we need to reanalyze samples? So it's pretty recent, so we're still in the middle of the investigation.
How many cases are we talking about?
Karen, you have that number, right, from the spreadsheet?
Yeah, I have the number. So there are 114 cases that have data associated with the wrong injection time. However, of those 114, some of them we were able to rerun them with the appropriate injection time. So there are about 87 cases that had data associated with an increased injection time. And of those cases, there are varying scenarios. Some of them just have a non-mixed sample. It might be a 1 exemplar run. From what I've gone through, I'm reviewing all the admin reviews of them and the data as I go through them. I've only come across one case where the evidence and the exemplars had the enhanced injection time. So there are a lot of different scenarios. So what we're doing is we're looking case by case. I gotta make sure I have the right one. I have the wrong letter out. There we go. So we're looking case by case. We've identified all the runs. We performed a statistical analysis to see if we could find some correlation with the enhanced injection time, and we couldn't do that, and Pat could explain that further. And so what we're looking at in the cases is these samples that had the increased injection time. We're looking for excessive peak heights, artifacts, and our main concern was, were there any minor component interpretations where the enhanced injection time may have affected results. And so far, we have not found any cases with those issues.
We repeat our results, so we have a good reference. If the first run was on a separate instrument and the second run occurred on the affected instrument, and there's a difference in the data, that would be grounds to reanalyze the case.
So is it a point where stakeholders have been notified, or?
Correct. You're looking at that notification in the commission materials.
And to add to that, every case has a memo to the record within the case that references this incident.
So I guess that would mean that if the lab work is turned over, the incident would be available to defense counsel as well?
It's part of discovery, yes.
Correct.
Yeah, with both of these, will you be reporting back to the commission once you finish your root cause analysis or corrective action?
Absolutely.
Other questions or comments on these? Thank you. Next, we have the New York City Police Department Police Laboratory. As I understand it, there's two disclosures. First, an email from April 9th with regard to a non-conformance. It appears from my reading of it that involves missing evidence in two separate cases, some items received in the lab but not able to be located. And then a second non-conformance in an email chain dated April 17th with regard to firearms operability with regard to a incident where an amended report had to be issued. Scott, you want to just give us briefly where you're at with these two?
Sure. So they're not finished as of yet due to obvious reasons with the staff, etc. But unfortunately, we were not able to locate those two pieces of missing evidence. We did thorough searching prior to this notification, and since this notification, they have not been discovered. In one of the cases, we do have video footage of it, unfortunately, going into the trash. The officer in the room was moving evidence at a different location, and as they were moving, they turned and bumped into the shelving, which resulted in the package falling into the trash. We believe that evidence that's that in that particular case, it was a sexual assault case. There were other evidence collected, and there were tested at the OCME. That's in that particular case, we're not clear if actually it did contain the evidence, and the reason we were able to look through the footage over a period of weeks was because the officer remembers moving that particular evidence and thought it was empty. That particular evidence contained underwear, where the sexual assault kit also contained underwear. So we're not sure if actually there was evidence within that packaging or the evidence was actually put into the sexual assault kit. We're working with the ADA assigned to the case to try and ascertain the circumstances of the impact. At this moment, the victim is known, the assailant is known to the victim, and the case is ongoing. We're still trying to get updates in regards to the totality of the impact in that particular case. So in that one, we know that we unfortunately placed that fell into the trash. When we were looking for this evidence, we searched many locations, and in that process, we also discovered that another piece of evidence was couldn't be located in that room. That evidence was unfortunately associated with a rape. We do not know the probative nature of that particular piece of evidence. There has been an arrest in that case, and we're trying to get an update from the District Attorney's Office on the potential impact. Although it was a rape, it seemed to be potentially a substrate that may have been handled by the suspect. But as I said, in that particular case, the suspect has been arrested. But again, we're just waiting for updates from the two DA's offices in regards to the impact.
All right, thank you. Let's go one at a time. With regard to that report, is there anything? Any questions or comments?
I suppose with regard to the second case in particular, is there any inkling about how the evidence was lost is obviously a very serious case.
Yeah. So in both cases, you know, we've got the camera footage which shows that particular one. So unfortunately, we have to assume probably something similar happened to that particular piece of evidence. So at the moment, all trash cans have been removed from all areas of evidence. We had a policy in place in the drug section where we hold about 60,000 pieces of evidence. Because David, you may not be aware, but other commission members are aware this has happened in the past, over the past 10, 15 years, where evidence unfortunately gets misplaced and lost, where we were searching the trash, but that searching of the trash was only conducted in the drug section, not in all areas of evidence. So at the moment, all trash containers are now not in those areas. But that's what we think may have happened with the second one, unfortunately.
So are the results of all this documented, and again, are those part of discovery, those given to the stakeholders?
Yes. So some of the documentation is incomplete. So so let me rephrase that. Actually, they don't have it because it's incomplete. We're still in the process. But the notification that was made to yourselves was also made to the AD assigned to the case, and they're aware of their requirement. And right now we're going through that process of documenting all of our investigation.
Is it just, I guess, it must only just be an assumption that the thing that fell into the trash belongs to the particular case because we can't find the particular case. There's no way to verify that something that we can't find was actually in the trash. So for either one of those cases, well, the second one, we don't know one thing or another, but even for the first one.
It's my understanding, David, the first one, we can't be 100% certain, of course, because we feel that it's more likely because of where it was in the room is associated with a particular borough in the city. And also the reason we're able to pinpoint a day was because the officer remembered handling that evidence and thought it was empty. But he did feel something in there, and that when he saw the video, he goes, yeah, that's that case. But you're 100% correct. We can't be 100% certain, but we believe the one case where there is no arrest at the moment, where the victim knows the assailant is alleged assailant is possibly the one that went in. We have a video of it going into the trash.
I mean, I'm sorry. So he felt the evidence and then he put it into the, like, how did he?
No. So when we were looking for that particular piece of evidence, and it could not be located, the officer remembered handling that piece of evidence and placing it in a certain area of the room on a particular day. So we then went and reviewed the footage that we have of that particular room on that day, and that officer was not in the room at the time. So it's a completely different officer, was moving evidence onto a shelf, and I haven't seen the footage, so the actions I'm taking, but what I've been described to me was putting on the shelf and turned and bumped into the shelf, and in the shelf there was a piece of evidence that fell out and went into an open trash bag.
Okay, and that officer just didn't hear it or observe it fall.
Correct. He had his back to it. You saw he had his back to it, and it went into the trash. He didn't acknowledge it.
Okay, and the second piece was, it was last traced to that room. That's where it's recorded as having been.
Correct. And that room is generally for evidence for DNA cases. In the laboratory, we're in the 5-story building. We have firearms evidence stored, and we have drug evidence stored, and like I said, there's different amounts of evidence stored throughout the facility. In this particular room, that's where that evidence would be stored, and that's where the last record of it in our LIMS system is stored.
All right. I appreciate it, Scott.
Scott, this is Lydia. Are the shelving units, do you have enough room on your shelving units for the evidence to be unstacked. So in other words, you don't have to put numerous items on top of each other? Or is it possible that the evidence fell when jostled because it was in a pile of more than one item?
Again, I haven't seen the video, Lydia, but I do think we're in the process of well, immediately we reorganized the room because it shouldn't have happened, of course. But we're also in the process of trying to ascertain the amount of evidence we have in the entire facility and whether we can store in the property clerk while we wait for testing to be done. So we're trying to make more space available throughout the building. But yes, it's something that we're definitely be looking at in regards to purchasing better ways of storing the evidence in that particular room.
Did we happen to receive the DNA lab? Did we happen to receive this evidence? I know you're in the middle of your investigation, but I was just curious.
So in the second case where there is an individual being arrested, that was the only evidence in the case, and it was a substrate, as I said, that we believe may have been handled, because why would it be submitted to us if it was not handled? But we're just confirming with the ADA. In regards to the other case, there were multiple items of clothing. There was a sexual assault kit collected, and that was delivered to the OCME, and they did do testing. I'm getting conflicting answers right now. I believe there was a male profile from the kit, but as I said, it was an acquaintance of the victim. So, but I was also just getting updated this morning that it may be inconclusive. So I don't have, but in regards to, I believe they were in a relationship of some kind. So,
Okay, I was just curious.
and then that's where we're trying to ascertain about we believe it was underwear that was in the packaging that we felt and thought maybe had been empty. Because upon the OCME receiving it, they opened up the sexual assault kit and there was underwear in that kit.
Okay.
So we don't know if the doctor, if the victim may have had two pairs of underwear for different reasons, or maybe the doctor prepared the package, but then placed the underwear into the sexual assault kit. All in all, it's not good. I mean, that's unfortunate. That's the real end of it. It's not good.
We understand. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you for obviously bringing it to our attention, and I assume that we will get updates on this as you find more.
Yeah, we'll be hopefully have a closeout letter for the September meeting.
And then with regard to the issue on the firearms report, can you just briefly tell us what that was?
Sure. So the analyst received a semi-automatic pistol. It was a Glock. The analyst performed an operability test to determine whether the firearm was operable, which it was, in semi-automatic, and generated a laboratory report and issued that laboratory report. That firearm then moved over to another examiner for serial number restoration because the serial number had been defaced. When that examiner was looking at that particular Glock, they noticed a protrusion at the back end of the firearm. When I saw that protrusion, they identified that's possibly what's called a selector switch. And that selector switch is something that is a modification done by, not by the manufacturer, a modification added to the weapon to turn it into a fully automatic weapon. So that was brought to the attention of the original analyst. The evidence was reassigned to the original analyst. They then looked at this protrusion, and it was a switch where it could take the firearm into a fully automatic state. Upon the operability testing, it did go fully automatic, but it was intermittent. So in some occasions, when they moved the switch, it went fully automatic. In other instances, it stayed as a semi-automatic. So an amended report was issued to indicate this additional modification and the possibility it could be full automatic, and that was given to the DA. Based upon the root cause analysis, we're still in the process of doing that. If I could just get my material, just so I could. So in that particular case, what we've discovered at the moment, the examiner is a relatively new examiner. been doing casework for less than a year. We're still in the process of coming, but potentially we think it's because the examiner do handle, unfortunately, a lot of Glocks. Glocks are quite common and may not have noticed that protrusion on the back. They should have, but they did not. The other part that it came to our attention coincidentally that same week was we have a firearms consultant who had a document for the Department of Homeland Security that was illustrating that this is being seen in the field, this modification. But that was by chance. The consultant is also a consultant for the Department of Homeland Security. So we're in the process of trying to make sure we're getting those law enforcement updates. We also did a statistical sampling of Glocks that were in the laboratory at the time because it was still going on with COVID. We looked at 26 of those cases and none of them had the modification. So at this moment, the examiner who missed this modification prepared a PowerPoint presentation. I supplied that to all of the staff, all the firearms examiners that we have, to make them aware of this potential modification on the Glock firearm.
So Scott, this is not a ghost gun, correct?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. And this is not related to the nonconformity, but could Glock manufacture their guns to make this modification impossible?
Yes, they do. And law enforcement and military have it, but the modification, the selection slide or selection switch, sorry, is on the side of the barrel of the firearm. Okay. It's like a dial. In this particular one, it was on the back of the barrel. It was on the back of the barrel. So the Glock version by the manufacturer, it's on the side, so it's obvious. And but in this modification, it was on the back, and that's the illegal one. You know, it's not illegal to have the modification equipment, but it's illegal to put it into the firearm.
Okay, but I guess what I'm saying is, could Glock change their manufacturing specs to make that modification ineffective or impossible?
Not. I don't believe so. No.
Okay.
No.
All right. Any questions or comments with regard to that item? All right. Thank you, Scott. Last item we have is the Suffolk County Crime Laboratory. This was a balance uncertainty issue. It was first reported to the commission, I believe, in September of 2019. It was closed with a corrective action plan that was presented to us. Actually, I think the corrective action plan was presented to us in 2019. That plan did include monitoring. And as I read this, the lab is just reporting to us the results of the monitoring on that corrective action plan and indicating that they're closing the issue. So any questions or comments with regard to this item? All right, that is everything. Again, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your patience with the process here. Huge thank you to staff for all of the work in getting this prepared, getting us to be able to operate with this technology. Our next meeting is September 16th, 2020. The location is Albany, but I anticipate we will be providing this type of format meeting as well, so folks don't have to travel and we don't have to get groups of people together. But in any event, you'll get more information there. And again, to all the commission members, thank you. Really appreciate your time. We know how busy you are. So with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn, and also move to acknowledge Jill and Shelley and Natasha. Great job.
Thank you. Don't forget Jackie, too.
And Jackie.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do I have a second?
Second both.
All right. This time I'm going to record everyone as yes unless someone specifically says no now. All right. It's all yes. Thank you. Take care. Be safe, everyone.
Stay safe, friends.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Everybody.
Everyone.